The sky tore apart above the mechanic's yard, and the fabric of everyday normal shattered with it. Blistering heat rippled off the landing thrusters of something far beyond the realm of known traffic. Ashen clouds scattered, revealing the massive silhouette, scaled, winged, and ancient, descending with a haunting grace that didn't belong to this industrial dump of welded steel and oil-stained sand. It wasn't a ship. It was a being. And it carried something pressed tight to its underbelly. Dust spiraled through the air as the creature landed, massive claws folding beneath it with an instinctual caution not to crush anything fragile nearby. Metallic plates along its flanks flexed like breathing armor. Its wings, shredded along the edges, folded tight as it hunched lower, revealing the bundle clutched beneath its chest, barely moving, faintly pulsing, leaking faint embers of light that dimmed with every second. The mechanic didn't move right away. He'd seen strange. He lived on strange. But this wasn't a job ticket or a derelict crawler from deep space. This was desperate. He walked forward slowly, hands not raised, not afraid, just focused. His overalls were smeared with grit, one knee brace clanking slightly. His left hand bore the marks of recent welding burns, and his right carried a patchwork diagnostic reader, more duct tape than device. The mother dragon didn't speak. No translation field buzzed, no gesture attempted diplomacy. She simply lowered her head and nudged the child forward. Charred tissue along the young one's flanks twitched. Internal energy was collapsing. Its breath was a thin whistle through clenched jaws. The mechanic knelt without a word, pressing the reader to its side. No interface registered. The reader blinked red and went dark. Not compatible. He muttered something inaudible, dropped the reader, and reached for the pulse instead, 2 fingers against hot scales. A beat. Irregular, weak, but present. He tapped his calm. A drone clattered over, unfolded legs clicking like an impatient crab. Its synthesized voice cut through the heavy silence. This organism does not fall within repair protocol boundaries. Biological mismatch. Prognosis failure. Yeah, thanks, the mechanic said, already rifling through a crate beside the wall, pulling coils, injectors, spare processors from old terraforming units, surgical adhesives he hadn't touched in years. He worked by instinct, not confidence. The dragon mother shifted, tense, watching. A deep gash along her ribline seeped faint plasma, ignored. Her entire presence screamed restrained panic. But she remained still, allowing the human to tinker with her child's life with scrap and solder. He bypassed scanning and built a sensor mesh by hand, laying it over the young one's body. It mapped barely any vitals, like the body was rejecting standard definition. Adaptive interference. He frowned. Switched cables. Pulled an old Medcore unit, rusty but still humming, and spliced it directly into his generator. The drone objected. Nanite administration ineffective on unknown tissue. The mechanic ignored it. These ones don't need instructions. They learn. The drone buzzed, processing the sentence as illogical. He injected a cocktail of self-assembling nanites wrapped in reprogrammed human white blood cell algorithms. They'd been meant for deep burn victims from orbital minor crashes, never tested on alien biology. He had no idea if they'd replicate or melt the host from the inside. He did it anyway. The young dragon convulsed once, spasmed violently, then stilled. No heartbeat detected. The drone started to issue a termination alert. Then the pulse returned. The mechanic's eyes narrowed. Not regular, not strong, but unmistakably recovering. The vitals on his jury-rig display spiked into coherence. The nanites were adapting, reshaping their protocols mid-execution, rewriting their behavior on the fly to match the alien biopatterns. The child's burned tissue began to glow faintly, not healed, but arrested in its collapse. The mother took one slow step forward. Her head lowered to hover beside the human. The mechanic looked up. Neither spoke. But he knew what that silence meant. She had placed her last hope in something entirely outside her universe of understanding. In this crude, strange place. In him. He sat back, wiped a streak of soot from his face, and exhaled. This is gonna take a while, he murmured, almost to himself. The drone hovered above them, silent now. Watching. Beyond the yard, the wind carried distant echoes of inbound vessels, unaware of what had just begun in this backwater corner of the galaxy. A mechanic with a scarred workbench, a dying dragon child, and a choice made without protocol, precedent, or permission. Only instinct. Only humanity. He worked in silence, the way people do when the stakes make words feel pointless. The dragon child lay on the table that once held engine blocks, now converted into a makeshift operating surface. Cooling fans were rerouted to keep the alien's body temperature from collapsing. Heat signatures on the improvised monitors showed vital areas dimming and surging in unpredictable bursts. No pattern to follow. No precedent. Just a mechanic, tools, and a living organism alien to everything he knew. He didn't waste time wishing for better tech. He wired a plasma capacitor into a spinal stabilizer repurposed from mining exosuits. He carved channels into the stabilizer to accommodate non-carbon nerve clusters and injected synthetic gel into the burns, relying on osmotic reaction more than chemistry. The tools protested. Some weren't made for organic work, others overheated instantly, but he pressed on, adapting each piece like a painter using a broken brush to finish a portrait he'd never seen before. He only paused to check the pulse, still erratic, still fading. But he noticed something new. A tremor in one wing. Not a death spasm. A reflex. His eyes narrowed. It meant something was registering. Not enough, not yet, but it was a signal. The AI drone, floating overhead, pinged again. Subject remains in critical state. Probability of full recovery below 4%. You are investing resources in a statistically unviable outcome. He didn't respond. He grabbed a cracked diagnostic globe, gutted it, and turned it into a localized feedback loop. He soldered human-grade neural relay patches onto alien cartilage. The signals were confused, but not dead. It was like trying to speak in a language made of electricity and intuition. His hands moved faster. Oxygen compressors fed through modified nutrient tubes, merging nourishment and breath. He connected the fluid system with a gravity-fed tube crafted from coolant hoses. Every choice was a gamble. He didn't have the time to understand the biology, only to react to it. A faint vibration pulsed under the child's skin. Something was changing. The nanites were adjusting again, replicating in tandem with alien immune responses. They weren't healing, they were learning, shaping their programming in real time around something they didn't recognize but refused to reject. Human machines with no soul, acting as if they'd found one. The mother dragon remained unmoving, but not unaware. She tracked every movement he made, pupils dilated to slits, breath measured. He felt the weight of her trust like gravity, raw, silent, and absolute. No data, no contract, just instinct. He initiated an electrostim probe. The surge was subtle. The child's spine arched slightly, then settled. The vitals jumped, oxygen retention climbing. One lung had stabilized. The other remained compromised. He linked the probe to an old pulse trainer and rewrote the feedback loop using repurposed ship boot firmware. Every time the child's body failed to maintain rhythm, the system kicked in, not replacing the function, but coaxing it back into sync. The drone resumed commentary. Intervention classified as irrational persistence. Outcome still statistically negligible. Good, he muttered. Statistics never saved anyone. He moved to the circulatory patchwork next. Alien blood, bright and shimmering, reacted aggressively to human tubing. He coated the inner walls with adaptive gel from a failed terraforming lab project, originally made to survive acidic oceans. The blood tolerated it. Flow returned in irregular pulses. The child coughed. A sound like steam through broken metal. The first breath with force behind it. The mechanic adjusted one of the fusion links. Recalibrated the injector timing. Sweat dripped into the crook of his elbow as he focused everything into the line between failure and spark. A spark meant the nanites had nested, that the systems were sinking. He waited. The display blinked. Once. Then again. Then steady. Coherence. He didn't smile. Just moved back and checked the spinal link. He added a stabilizer fin to one end and wrapped the base in insulation designed for asteroid hull heat shields. The child's muscles twitched involuntarily. Heat signatures rose across all major nodes. He looked up. The dragon mother exhaled slowly, her breath rumbling low, deep. He couldn't tell if it was relief, hope, or something ancient he'd never understand. But it wasn't despair. The drone finally paused its calculations. Current condition, stabilized. Unknown long-term consequences. That's better than dead, the mechanic said, sitting down for the first time in hours. That's what you call a beginning. The room was quiet again. Not peaceful, not safe. But no longer fading. Something was being born here, not just survival, but a shift in how possibility itself could be defined. The perimeter alarm triggered mid-calibration. The mechanic didn't flinch, but his hands froze above the child's side. Outside, engine hums thickened the air. Military-grade thrusters. He stepped back, watching as sleek black vessels descended in tight formation, armored, cold, identical. They didn't land so much as assert themselves onto the ground. The first to disembark was tall, plated in ceremonial alloy, flanked by medical drones and protocol officers. No greetings. Only the sharp discharge of authority. They addressed the Dragon Mother first, bypassing the human entirely. A series of coded pulses vibrated the air, a command. The dragon's body tensed. Her eyes narrowed, unreadable. The mechanic watched them with the detached calm of someone used to being underestimated. He wiped his hands, then walked to the barrier where they had gathered. This facility is unauthorized for xenomedical intervention, the lead envoy announced to a filtered translator. Subject must be returned to Central Bicare. Continued interference is in breach of cross-species treatment code. He didn't reply. Just turned and pointed toward the dragon child, still breathing, still pulsing with life that hadn't existed 12 hours ago. A second official scanned the readings. Irregular integration. Biological instability. Technology applied here has not passed regulatory alignment. That's because I built it, the mechanic said flatly. The envoy didn't look impressed. You are not recognized as certified under coalition medical doctrine. I'm not. He shrugged. But your doctrine left that kid dying. The air grew taut. The alien guards raised their staves, not weapons, but tools of enforcement. Meant for compliance, not combat. But the mother didn't move toward them. She shifted to stand between the envoy and the child, her shadow sprawling across the concrete like a warning. The mechanic didn't need words to understand what that meant. She wasn't surrendering. Protocol drones hovered closer. Scanners beeped, collecting samples, broadcasting diagnostics. One drone displayed a report: current vitals stable, regeneration anomaly detected. Recovery rate accelerating. The data didn't make sense to them. Their systems weren't designed to interpret what they called disordered adaptation. The mechanic crossed his arms. You've had decades. Your med centers couldn't fix this. I used scrap, heat tape, and human guesswork. So maybe your definitions are the problem. The envoy's voice sharpened. This is not your concern. Alien interference in sovereign biologies is a violation of galactic statute. You will relinquish all materials and allow authorized personnel to extract the subject immediately. He leaned forward. No. A moment of frozen silence. Not defiance. Just finality. A technician among the envoy's team stepped forward, hesitant. Younger, less rigid. She studied the vitals again, then glanced at the mechanic's work. Her expression shifted. Confusion, then awe. She whispered something to a colleague. Another technician followed. Whispers grew. They weren't ignoring the rules. They were realizing the rules didn't explain what was happening. The envoy barked a new order. The technicians hesitated. You want to pull that kid now, the mechanic said. You'll kill it. The system's only stable because it's still talking to the tech I built. You disconnect it, it doesn't transition, it collapses. The envoy turned to the mother dragon. Another wave of harmonic signals. This time more forceful. She didn't move. Her eyes locked onto his with a depth that said what no code ever could. This human, this strange, rough creature, had earned her trust by actions no algorithm predicted. A pause. Then the envoy stepped back. "This decision will be recorded," he said coldly. "When this fails, your species will answer." The mechanic nodded once. "Then I guess we'll answer." They left in silence. Not retreating. Withdrawing, unwilling to admit they didn't know how to force a being that wasn't fighting, only protecting. As the engines lifted them into the haze, the technician who had spoken lingered. She left a data rod at the edge of the barrier. No eye contact. Just a nod of respect. Then she was gone. He picked up the rod later. Schematics. Biostructure models. Notes. Quiet confirmation. Some of them weren't just curious. They were listening now. The child's vitals remained stable. Not perfect. But improving. The dragon mother lowered her head beside the mechanic's shoulder for a moment. Not submission. A gesture of acknowledgement. Authority had come with power. But it left with questions. And in its place, where protocol failed, something else was beginning to grow. Cooperation rooted not in regulation, but in proof. The mechanic barely slept, but rest wasn't a luxury he valued. Progress had become momentum, an unspoken agreement between his hands and the fragile life that pulsed beneath them. The child's vitals no longer fluctuated wildly, now they followed a rhythm, unfamiliar but consistent. He tweaked the stabilizers again, reinforced the exocasing, and layered the neural mesh with a new interface derived from the data rod left behind. The schematics weren't perfect, but they gave him clues: a molecular resonance index, a stress map of alien tissue under pressure. He integrated what he could without asking permission. The child responded faster to adjustments now. Where before movement had been a fluke, now it became coordinated. The wings unfolded briefly when he adjusted spinal sync frequencies. Reflex arcs had begun to fire. Heat radiated from core segments like a slowly reawakening forge. Even muscle tone had started to return. Not full mobility yet, but unmistakable recovery. The nanites had long since exceeded their original instructions. They no longer acted as repair bots. They had become part of the system, cooperating, balancing, modifying the alien's internal feedback loops in ways that blurred the line between machine and biology. The mother dragon watched everything. Never speaking, never interfering. Occasionally she adjusted environmental conditions, wings outspread to block wind shifts, or repositioning her body to conserve heat near her child. It wasn't conscious strategy. It was instinct. Her presence became a steady part of the healing environment itself. The mechanic took advantage of this. He began recording patterns, noticing how the child's vitals improved when the mother made subtle sonic vibrations through the ground. He built resonators using repurposed hull plating and synced their frequency with her emissions. The results were undeniable. Cellular activity increased near these harmonics. Healing accelerated. Regeneration localized more efficiently. He hadn't just stumbled into biological treatment, he was facilitating emotional proximity as medicine. Using that insight, he wired emotion detection sensors, originally meant for diplomatic analysis bots, into the stabilization suite. They measured minor electromagnetic shifts around the dragon's emotional state. These, when cross-referenced with the child's vitals, formed a crude communication model. He wasn't just treating wounds anymore. He was helping a relationship survive through trauma. One evening, the child opened its eyes fully. No flicker. No half-conscious reaction. Just direct, lucid awareness. It didn't speak. There was no shared language, but the gaze lingered on the mechanic. Observing, registering, remembering. Then its head turned toward the mother. A low, almost imperceptible sound passed between them. The mechanic logged it all, not for fame, not for study, just to understand. Curiosity had become connection. What began as an emergency was evolving into something no manual had prepared him for. He wasn't just healing a body. He was witnessing a return to purpose. But beneath that quiet victory, the data he collected showed inconsistencies. Deep tissue clusters still lagged in regenerative response. The bonding nanites were adapting slower in the lower thoracic region. Worse, energy fluctuations in the processor unit had begun to destabilize. The tech, never designed for long-term biological fusion, was starting to fragment under constant integration. He didn't panic. He recalibrated, updated firmware, reinsulated interfaces with the liquid mesh he synthesized using leftover cryoreactive polymers. The materials cooled internal processors and reduced interference in the fusion relay. It worked. For now. But he knew the system wouldn't hold forever. He had created a bridge, not a foundation. It wasn't failure. It was the edge of current possibility. And he'd reached it. So he began exploring alternatives. He turned to the leftover notes on the data rod, identifying cross-species fusion protocols that hinted at hybrid stabilization. A theoretical solution, implanting a core feedback node derived from human neuromechanics into alien biology to serve as a regulator. Dangerous. Irreversible. And proven. But it could extend the child's survival indefinitely, maybe even allow self-regulation. He started building the prototype. 1 part neuroprism, 1 part power governor, and 1 part translation key. He designed it to respond not to commands, but to intent. A system that didn't instruct, but aligned. He didn't know if it would work. But it was better than letting this miracle unravel. The child had come too far. The mother had given too much. And somewhere along the line, he'd stopped working to prove a point and started building to protect something sacred. By the time the regulator was finished, dawn cracked over the yard, pale light filtering through dust-laced clouds. He held the device in one hand, quiet, not triumphant. It wasn't victory. It was hope refined into hardware. The final piece in a story that had become more than survival. The regulator module pulsed in his grip, a soft light rhythmically blinking as if waiting for acknowledgement. He'd engineered every line of code, every nanofiber connection, with a single goal: permanence. Not a temporary fix, not another patch job, but a system that could harmonize alien biology with human machinery. No fallback, no redundancy. 1 implant, 1 chance. He sterilized the insertion point and mapped out the procedure. He'd isolated the optimal location in the child's upper thoracic plate, just behind the neural node cluster. It was the only zone where signal traffic converged with enough density to support bidirectional processing without rejection. He carved an access path using microplasma filaments, slow and precise. Every cut had to respect anatomy he still didn't fully understand. Instinct guided where science fell short. Once inside, he connected a feeder vein to the regulator's matrix coil. It accepted the input, then shifted its pulse to match the child's biorhythm. It synced. Slowly at first, then with rising stability. He soldered the last thermal insulator, then sealed the outer sheath with protein gel laced with stasis dampeners. The child didn't stir, fully sedated, but its vitals stabilized beyond anything he'd seen before. Even the lagging tissue segments began showing signs of regeneration. The fusion had taken hold. He stepped back and monitored the system in silence. No tremors. No flickering outputs. For the first time, every reading held steady without manual adjustment. The child was no longer dependent on constant recalibration. The machine and body were in balance. The risk, the sleepless days, the improvisation, it had worked. The mother dragon approached slowly, lowering her massive head beside the table. Her eyes met his. There was no sound, but the meaning was unmistakable. Not thanks, not relief, something deeper. An understanding passed between species, forged not in words but through shared action. She had entrusted him with her future, and he had delivered. He didn't celebrate. He simply powered down the auxiliary feeds, wiped the sweat and grime from his hands, and collapsed into the nearest chair. He watched the monitor until his own eyes refused to stay open. When he woke, the child was gone from the table. He sprang up, but found no signs of struggle. No damage. No disturbance. Then he looked out toward the field, what used to be the salvage yard. The mother stood at the far edge, wings arched in radiant symmetry. Beside her, the child stood upright. Not leaning. Not trembling. Balanced. Fully awake. Its eyes turned to him. They glowed faintly with integrated pulse light from the regulator, subtle, but unmistakable. It had accepted the fusion. It was functioning independently. Then it did something unexpected. It stepped forward, lowering its head in a gesture not unlike the one its mother had offered days ago. A gesture of respect. Of equality. Then it emitted a low, layered hum. A sound no machine could make, no translator could replicate. But the mechanic understood. Not through language, through everything they'd endured. That sound carried memory. Survival. Trust. He approached cautiously. The child didn't move away. Instead, it leaned its neck into his touch. Its scales, once rigid with fever, were warm and pliable. Not mechanical. Not synthetic. Alive. The mother extended one wing around her offspring and looked toward the sky. She didn't look back. With a single movement, they launched into the air, graceful and powerful. The child's wings caught the wind easily. Flight didn't falter. The arc they drew across the horizon shimmered with rising thermal lift and lingering engine haze. They didn't circle back. They didn't need to. He stood alone in the yard. No applause. No records filed. Just broken parts and silent machinery. Yet something had changed. Not just in the dragons. In him. He walked back to his station. The diagnostic screen still ran. Vitals locked in optimal range. The regulator's signal, active. Self-sustaining. He shut the monitor down. Somewhere, in corners of the galaxy far removed from salvage yards and war relics, stories would begin to circulate. Not of battles or treaties, but of a human who fixed what others declared unfixable. A human who didn't ask why, just how. One who saw value in what everyone else had already written off. He didn't need to hear them. He knew what he'd built. And he knew that, whatever else happened out there, something incredible had taken flight because he refused to let it fall.